Are we good to get started? Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. I think it's been about 10 minutes, isn't it? Awesome. Okay, so hopefully everybody's feeling relatively well refreshed now at this point, which is great. So we're going to go straight into developments in diagnostics from Tom Wilson. Now, I believe Tom's a West Ham supporter, and they had a bit of a shocker yesterday.
Well, it was snowing.
Well, it was treacherous conditions, wasn't it? It was treacherous. So he might be he might be in a good mood still anyway. So that's so we're going to touch upon some developments in diagnostics. Tom's going to be talking a little bit about the rapid diagnostic service amongst other things as well. So Tom, over to you.
Well, at least that's made the Christmas list a little bit cheaper this year. That's one person off it. Hello, everyone. So my name's Tom Wilson. I'm the interim programme director for the Rapid Diagnostic Centre. The aim of this section really is to give you a very quick overview of how patients' cancers diagnosed. How patients' cancers are diagnosed. What is that route to diagnosis? I'm not going to cover screening programs because Deepak's done that a bit earlier. I'm going to focus on some of the new developments that really complement the GP 2-week wait referral process, which, as we'll see, remains really core, the core route to diagnosis for most people with cancer. Okay, if we could, thank you very much. Next slide, brilliant, thanks. Diagnostic stuff is important, part of the NHS long-term plan that Deepak spoke about earlier. And basically, the pandemic notwithstanding, we should be diagnosing 63% of patients at an earlier stage by 2023 was the plan. And the East of England region as a whole is currently at about 57%. So if we were going to reach that 63% target across the whole of the East of England, we'd need to diagnose about 5,650 more patients each year than we are currently doing. That gives a sort of scale of the task that we need to do. And of course, diagnostics is generally big business. What we've asked is try to get an understanding of how much of the total diagnostic activity within Mid and South Essex Hospital Trust is related to the diagnosis of cancer. Now, these figures here, they're all subject to a bit of revision. No one's actually ever tried to ask that question before, and this is the kind of first cut. So doubtless, if you see these numbers again, they will have changed. And of course, they don't include the blood tests and other pathology tests. So earlier, Deepak mentioned FIT testing, for example. And since April 21, so this financial year, our GP practices, our 150 GP practices, have ordered over 7,830 FIT tests. Now, none of those are in these numbers up here, but nonetheless, it's still showing us that we've got about a shade over 500,000 diagnostic activities happening in the trust, of which about 80,000 are there for cancer. So as a simple rule of thumb, about 14% of all diagnostic activity in MSEFT is connected to, in some way, a diagnosis of cancer. So it's quite a significant chunk of activity. Deepak, next slide, please, or Tom, sorry, next slide. So for people who get a diagnosis of cancer, how do they actually get there? Now, again, the same caveats about data quality as before, but this is the best effort we can come up with, and it is a model. You can see that in 2016 there was a national taking all the data across the country. These were the numbers that came across for routes to diagnosis, with GP 2-week wait referrals being about 38%, other GP referrals being sort of 24%, and so forth. And you can see the figure that we've come up with for the financial year 2021 in MSE. Now, as I say, remember, we've got a bit of a warning about data quality and so forth, but we're lower than the national average for screening, which is probably, in the scheme of things, a bad thing. Probably means that we've got more work to do, as Deepak's slides, I think, showed about identifying people who are eligible for screening and making them or encouraging them to take up that opportunity. We're better than national average for emergency presentations, which is probably a good thing overall, because we know that people who tend to get a cancer diagnosis via an emergency presentation are usually much later in their stage and tend to have worse outcomes. We identify a lot more cancers through our 2-week wait referrals than through our standard referrals. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It could go either way, really. It's good that we're using that system, but are we really overusing that because we know the waits for standard RTT sort of type referrals it takes so long, so people are lowering their threshold of what they might put through a 2-week wait referral, and therefore there's a lot of what we might term inappropriate 2-week wait referrals. So there's lots of questions to ask in this data. But what it does show us overall is that whichever way we cut it, the route to diagnosis via a GP practice, whether it's 2-week wait referral, GP referral, or even those other outpatient ones, they all start with a GP primary care intervention and come through that way. So it's really, really important that we make sure that the referral process and GP access to diagnostics and rapid access in general is a key priority. Okay, next slide, please. So if we take that model, and again, this is a model, it's not a statement of fact. We know we had 773 confirmed diagnoses of colorectal cancer in 2021, and it gives us a good idea of how people actually entered that system. And as I say, what it really reinforces is that central to the cancer diagnosis is the role of primary care and the efficacy of that 2-week wait referral process. So what I want to do is to go on and cover briefly 2 developments in that 2-week wait space, the Rapid Diagnostics Centre and the Skin Analytics Service. Then I quickly want to go over some other initiatives which really support and complement primary care. Just a couple of slides around the targeted lung health check programme, which Deepak mentioned earlier, which is live in Thurrock and is coming to Southend, and some things which are a bit more on the cutting edge of research proposals, but which might have an impact upon diagnostics going forward and give you a kind of flavour of what's happening in that workspace, which is around something called Cytosponge and a company called Abtrace. So that's what we're going to pick up in the next couple of slides. Deepak, Tom, next slide. Thanks very much. So the RDC is a national programme. The top part of that slide shows you what the broad specification is all about. It started with our non-site specific, or also known as our vague symptoms pathway, as early as 2019. But it was always intended that the principles of the national RDC specification, those should ultimately be applied to all 2-week wait referrals for all tumour sites. That's the plan of action, is that by 2024, that was what they said originally. Clearly, everything's moved because of the pandemic. But by 2024, all 2-week wait referrals would go through this kind of process and these principles would be applied. So our current focus locally is on looking at upper and lower GI 2-week wait referrals. We have a mix at the moment across our 3 hospital sites. So we have some straight to test pathways. We have some straight to test pathways that work very efficiently, some which work less efficiently, some where we have no straight to test pathways. And so we're looking at upper and lower GI. And our aim is to create a single team made up of consultant gastroenterologists, cancer nurse specialists, administrative pathway navigators, who basically will manage every referral, whether a GP 2-week wait referral or a consultant upgrade, but importantly not screening referrals, for upper and lower GI and the non-site specific. So we'll have one single team of people, which will effectively be our rapid diagnostic service. The single team, they'll be located in MSCFT in a central base, probably initially at Basildon Hospital, but the staff will be working at all 3 sites to an agreed protocol, which is what the bottom half of the slide is starting to explain. Patients will be communicating with that central hub, but of course they will continue to access their tests at any of the 3 hospital sites, just as they do now. So we might refer to it as a rapid diagnostic centre, but that doesn't imply that all patients will be directed to one place. They will continue to receive tests at their local hospital. But what we want to be able to do by centralising that hub is make sure that they have the ability to go to whichever site is able to offer them the first appointment slot that is the most convenient to them. That's the name of the game. So there are a number of principles that the RDC will work with, which makes it a bit different from our current 2-week wait pathways. Firstly, it is very dependent upon high quality referrals. It needs to have, for there to be effective nurse-led triage, the referrals that come in have to have a full suite of information. Those core function tests, like the FIT test, the blood tests, all need to be completed in primary care to both guide the GP as to what the right referral route is, and also ensure the RDC team have the information so that they can book the majority of patients directly onto their tests. So that the idealised pathway is see my GP, next thing I get is an appointment for a test, and then the next thing I would get for the vast majority of people would be confirmation that actually I don't have cancer. That would be where we would like the thing to go. The second principle is that we need to have effective nurse-led triage of every referral, working to consultant-agreed protocols. But what we aim to do with that is to start to remove the variation that happens across the 3 hospital trusts at the moment. Because they're consultant-agreed protocols, we want to try to take out unnecessary tests. So when this is implemented, we will reduce the number of colonoscopies that are ordered, because the consultant protocol indicates that we don't need to repeat those tests if you've had one previously in 3 years and they meet certain criteria. We want to ensure that process is protocol-led and consultant neutral. We know that a number of delays occur, mainly because the results get ordered by Dr. X, and it's only Dr. X who can see them. And Dr. X only does a 2-week wait clinic once a week. So even though the result might have come back the following day, you're going to wait 5 days until Dr. X looks at those results. So we want to try and make it consultant neutral. We need to balance that, of course, though, is making sure that the process is personalised. We don't want everyone to go through some great big giant sausage factory. And the first step along that is building in a frailty assessment gateway along the way. Currently, our straight to test pathways don't use frailty scores. They just base it simply upon age. If you're over 80, you get a different pathway. And what we want to get to is the place of looking at saying, actually, it's your frailty score that will make a difference as to whether you go through a standard pathway. And if you're over a score, I think it's 6, on the Rockwood score, then actually you get diverted away. You have a more personalised conversation as to how we need to support you through that diagnostic journey for something that works for you as an individual. And lastly, we need to make sure, of course, that this process adequately handles the 95% of people who get referred to it, but who won't have cancer. It needs to work very smoothly for the people who do get that cancer diagnosis, but the majority of people that go through it, the overwhelming majority of people that go through this service, will not have a cancer diagnosis. But what they may have along the way is found out actually there are a number of other things that are wrong with them. And we need to make sure that what doesn't happen is they just bounce straight back to the GP. They need to have an effective handover to another service. So this is what we're trying to get to with the RDC. And our aim is to try to launch this new service really from about the middle of February, starting in Basildon, then progressing to Southend, and then picking up Broomfield, which reflects the place where those sites are at the moment in terms of individual capacity and what they do for straight to test at the moment. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, skin analytics. This is a slightly different tack, but this is the name of our primary care teledermatology service. In theory, it's very simple. Patients with a suspicious skin lesion have a dermoscopic image taken by the primary healthcare team. It's very important, that point. I'll come back to it in a minute. And that is then assessed by some artificial intelligence algorithms. And if the AI determines the lesion is suspicious, that's reported to the GP immediately, as in within a couple of seconds. And the GP can then make a decision as to whether they need to make a 2-week wait referral or some other action. And if the AI determines the lesion is benign, the image is then reviewed by a human consultant dermatologist who reports their advice back to the GP within 2 working days. And again, the GP can then decide whether they want to make an onward referral to dermatology services or manage the condition themselves or discharge the patient completely. Couple of things to take away is that the AI itself doesn't make the diagnosis. It effectively provides instant advice and guidance to the GP. But the final decision as to what to do always rests with the GP. In the regulatory parlance, it is an adjunctive tool. It is not, doesn't make the diagnostic itself. The image must be taken by a healthcare professional trained to use skin analytics software. Patient-generated images are almost never of sufficient quality to allow an AI algorithm to assess them, or indeed for a human being, for a consultant dermatologist to look at them. And our local dermatologists certainly have asked that practices don't use patient-generated images. And that they don't want the trusts themselves don't want to see those patient-generated images, and they advise primary care not really to use them to make a decision to refer. And the key with the skin analytics is that the practices that we know where it's used most often and most successfully have a model where the image is taken by a practice nurse or healthcare assistant, and then the GP appointment actually then looks at the ones which need to be looked at rather than a GP appointment to look at them all. And certainly, if you're working in a practice that doesn't use skin analytics at the moment, and you'd like to persuade your GPs to do so, then let us know, and we're more than happy to push it out. Next slide, please. Just a quick touch on how successful has the skin analytics thing been. We deploy it currently in 108 of our 150 practices. So there are 42 out there who still don't use it. And these are the outcomes of the cases of the most up-to-date data we had. So a couple of things to bear in mind is that MSEFT receives more 2-week wait skin referrals than any other hospital trust in the whole of England by some margin, very significantly more than any other, than even the very large teaching trusts. We get many, many more. And we know that in the month of September, MSEFT received 1,468 referrals for suspected skin cancer. And we know that GPs created 322 cases in skin analytics. So if the GP followed the advice of skin analytics, then 171 referrals came through with that report. So that's about 12%. So that's where we are at the moment in terms of usage. About 12% of our referrals to dermatology are used via the skin analytics AI-powered tool. Now, nationally, we know that the conversion rate for GPs to identify skin cancers is about 6%. So of all the referrals they send through on a 2-week wait pathway, about 6% of them will end up having skin cancer diagnosed. So the bar is reasonably low in the sense of what artificial intelligence has to be better at to improve conversion rates. 6% is not, I mean, it's better than others, but it's not a huge number. So we're hoping that the skin analytics tool will have a much better conversion rate. And finally, GPs are advised that they should use skin analytics prior to making a 2-week wait referral. So in theory, they should only really use the tool when they have a suspicion that the presenting lesion is actually potentially cancerous. Shouldn't be used for other dermatology conditions. And so to date, we've had 2,251 cases created, and reasonably, therefore, the alternative course of action for a GP would have been to make a 2-week wait referral. If they didn't have a skin analytics tool, they would have just made the 2-week wait referral. And we can see that of those 2,251 cases, 1,058 or 47% of them were recommended for a 2-week wait referral. So without going into the detail, it means that 53% of them were not recommended to be a 2-week wait referral. There may have been other things, but they weren't a 2-week wait referral. So assuming the GP followed the recommendation and assuming that the only other logical course of action would have been a 2-week wait referral, we can say that we've avoided 1,193 2-week wait referrals since October 20, which is a significant impact upon the dermatology service in the trust. Now, there's a lot of assumptions in there. We're making an assumption built upon an assumption, which is why we don't necessarily shout these numbers from the rooftops. And certainly our MSCFT colleagues would say they've not noticed a drop-off in referrals in their clinic yet. But if we can get to very consistent and widespread use, this holds out a hope that we can really manage those referrals into dermatology in a better way than we do at the moment. Next slide, please. So picking up just something that Deepak mentioned earlier, which is around the targeted lung health checks. Now, these are part of a national programme. These are where people who have a past history of smoking are identified, they're triaged and they're invited to attend a mobile CT scan. Operates in Thurrock locally, and for the national purposes, we're paired with Luton. So our mobile unit trawls up and down the M1 and M25 every couple of weeks. Now, this is going to become a national screening programme in due course, and certainly Southend is going to receive their mobile unit at some point next year. We know that's coming. And again, it just shows how the primary care identification of at-risk patients is key to those aims of the long-term plan and diagnosing cancers in more people earlier and giving them better outcomes. Could you go to the next slide, please? So just the impact of what that targeted lung health check has done so far. So they're working their way through the practices in Thurrock. They've completed 13 practices so far. And at the moment, they've got about a 1% detection rate for cancer. But many more people diagnosed with non-cancer illnesses, either directly related to their respiratory symptoms or for a large number of incidental findings that happened as a result of having the CT scan. And where there is a suspicion of cancer, these are referred via a consultant upgrade to the lung cancer MDT or other MDT as relevant. And where there are significant other findings, they're referred on to another service. But you can see the numbers there of how this is progressing. Next slide, please. So just going to move on to a couple of innovations which are much further down the line in the diagnostic development pipeline. But just to give you an idea of what's coming along. Cytosponge as a technology in itself is not particularly new. I think it's been around for about 10 years, but it's now being trialled formally in acute settings to triage patients for waiting for a gastroscopy. And locally, one of our PCNs, Chelmer West in Chelmsford, is going to be part of a pilot to see whether Cytosponge can be used effectively in primary care. And it's worth noting that this already has widespread use in Scotland's NHS. So this is a nurse-led process of getting a patient to swallow a sponge. Apparently it's about 2 centimetres long, about the size of a large paracetamol. Swallow the sponge opens up in your stomach, gets pulled back out on the string, and you collect the cells for analysis. This basically a non-invasive procedure replaces an endoscopy of the esophagus and a biopsy, which can take up to an hour. This is a non-invasive procedure which will detect Barrett's esophagus, which can be pre-malignant and lead to esophageal cancer. So the real benefit for us comes as well as in the detection of Barrett's, but also in freeing up those endoscopy slots. So there's more capacity for other 2-week wait referrals and generally freeing up consultant time. Now we've got our pilot beginning in January, and we're looking to recruit 400 patients who regularly take PPIs and have not had an endoscopy in the past. We recruit directly from patient lists, but also from walk-in patients who buy those PPIs over the counter, but may not attend their practice for management of their condition. So as we progress this in January through to May, we'll keep people informed as to how it goes. Next slide, please. And then even earlier in the research pathway is something called Abtrace, or a company called Abtrace. Now, essentially, Abtrace make the point that most information for identifying patients at risk of cancer is already in the GP record, but it's usually buried, as it were, in the free text. And so individuals tend not to get picked up with a normal search based upon SNOMED codes for specific symptoms, for diagnoses or medications. Abtrace uses AI algorithms to look for certain keywords in the free text notes, and then it creates a list of potential patients who can then be in turn sent further surveys, which will create you an at-risk register, and those people can be invited to attend for a consultation. Now, this stuff is very early stages. We have one practice in Thurrock who signed up to be part of the funded research work. I think the opportunity is still around to other practices if they wish to participate. But again, this is just something which is very early stages and just goes to show how those routes to diagnosis are going to change as we go forward. Now, it may or may not grow into a commercial proposition, But there are lots of systems out there which use artificial intelligence and other tools to help primary care teams identify patients at an early stage who are at risk of cancer. So this is all part of all part of that. And next slide, please. I think is me done. Yeah, happy to take any questions.
Tom, thank you very much. That was that was a real good whistle stop tour through a lot of really exciting things that are happening in MSc. And again, it comes back to that whole kind of concept, doesn't it? A whole sort of concept of early diagnosis and then also sort of streamlining services and care as well. So early diagnosis, RDS, and your cytosponge and Abtrace, and then obviously streamlining sort of the whole kind of process, the cancer referral process. Things like skin analytics are quite key. And again, it's that whole kind of promotion of gut feelings, really early diagnosis type thing. We've got a question coming from Trish.
So how to get involved? I'll make sure we circulate. I'll contact you individually, Trish, but I'll also make sure we circulate the details around how you sign up for the skin analytics work. The targeted lung health check is I think there is a regular program of that with the practices in Thurrock to make sure that they are on a clear trajectory of when those practices get picked up as part of the program, which is the same way I believe it will work in Southend when it comes there. But again, I'll ask Carol, who is the program director of that bit of work, just to check that there isn't any way that a practice can kind of put their hand up and volunteer. I don't think there is. I think there's a kind of fixed way of doing these things. But I'll double check with Carol and I'll make sure I send the details on to Tom to circulate to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions at all? No? Tom, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Awesome.
So